Biden. I'm the chair of the board of MORE, Movement Omaha for Race Equity. Glad you can join us. We had a little technical difficulties there trying to get our act together. Today we got a special show, special in the sense that we've invited Eliga Ali, who's a known time community person, to talk about some of the issues related to racial and ethnic disparities. Elijah was front and center in some of the work that I did in the community when I worked for Douglas County, and also he's been involved in community work for well over 40 years, trying to challenge systems and make changes for us in the community. Elijah is a longtime community advocate in Omaha. He was one of the first to develop an information network dealing with community programs on cable television. He has spoken in post-secondary institutions dealing with racism and so on, and especially about the African-American families and other sociological issues that plague our community. We invite him to discuss the current chaos in our communities, particularly in Omaha. And one of the areas that Elijah promotes is that we're in for a rude awakening, considering the nature of dysfunctional nonprofits and appointed leadership in our community and the lack of how they don't relieve us out of these situations. And also Elijah alludes to some of the situations, genocidal, what we face. We're in a maze here in Omaha. One of the critical factors that we've paid attention to is the statistical data on racial ethnic disparities, and it has not gotten better over the years in the government structure because many nonprofits and people of color who purport to serve us are not doing a good job. Elijah, welcome to Throwing Down Some Heavy Light. Share a little bit more about yourself. We get into the questions. Eliga Ali.
Thank you, sir. Should I expound at this point here?
Beg your pardon? Go ahead.
Yes. First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. My background is from Omaha. My family moved here when I was 3 years old. I'm just turned 80 this month. Resided primarily in the traditional African-American community. Went to grade school at St. Benedict's, which at that time, even unbeknownst to me, was kind of a private school at that time. But all my teaching came through nuns. The whole Catholic background kind of set me in the consciousness of righteousness. You have to recite the 10 Commandments 12 or 13 times a day, then you have to kind of take them on as a format for how you're going to function, which in later years became an issue, particularly when you try to maintain a righteous concept amongst an unrighteous world. And that's one of the things I'm dealing with right now, even heavily involved with the activities of the Nation of Islam, not so much from a religious stance as opposed to a political stance. The independence causes me to be able to be a little more understanding of the value set, which most of us are not aware of. We know the 10 Commandments, but we don't know the 10 Commandments. And very few people know that the only document that was ever identified as coming straight from God through Moses was the 10 Commandments. But that kind of makes it very difficult for people who have different denominations and different other beliefs to follow that. But the 10 Commandments give you the foundation of your righteousness, and very few people know that. And that's kind of my move from this point.
Good. Elijah, I have a number of questions I want to hit you, and I know we're going to open it up after 30 minutes, let the audience, but I want to see if I can go through them as much as I can. You've been involved in the issue of racial and ethnic disparities and the malfeasance of how African-American youth are treated in Douglas County juvenile justice system. Why is it so alarming when one can examine their disparity data? Why is the situation so alarming from your perspective?
It's genocidal because you have a population that has been predominantly handled by foster care to start off with. We are a foster care people. We are our mothers and other females usually function under a social work kind of system. Men would have jobs, but just here again, the size of Omaha was allowed for us to measure things at a younger age, which gave us a better understanding of what those social systems do to us. We have always been secondary slaves, still are. And we, because of ignorance and lack of the kind of education necessary to make you really totally fulfilled, we go through the system as opposed to understanding the system that we go through. And that's one of the predominant things right now that we have to really be aware of. With 75% of our households single parents, and we have more black men in prison today than we had slaves in 1865, we're not in a good position at all in this country.
Wow. You know, I know that we receive millions of dollars to reduce the disproportionate and high number of youth in the system. Racist judges have built a Taj Mahal building to help those issues, only pull the bait and switch, and the youth are still stuck at that old DMC building with incompetent administrators and few programs. What can we do to reverse those conditions?
Nothing.
You don't think we get out of this quagmire, this cesspool?
We could get out of it, but where would we go once we got out?
Wow.
All right. The closest that I think we can get to is Islamically. And that's not from the text version of Islamically, it's from the spiritual aspects of those direct information that the Prophet Muhammad brought to civilization. Very few people get that kind of education and know that. The 10 Commandments. You can pick 10 people randomly, and I guarantee you that 10 of them, unless they were nuns or priests, could quote you the 10 Commandments in their order and understand each one. But that's the only guideline that the Creator directly gave us to follow, and we can't even give them off. That lets you know how far away in a sinful world we are from paradise.
Got you. I have been attempting to make repeated contact with the Juvenile Justice Department to share and engage families and community to help them get more in our community and so on. And we don't really have a track record of phone calls or engaging our community in terms of long term. How do we get functionaries who refuse to work in their jobs to work with a community and engage families in their communities? What advice did you have on how we get people to get out of their offices to help work in our community and come to the Black and brown community? How do we do that?
You can't do that because the system is primarily structured through African American women. Okay, and that's the we've always been in a poverty mindset, which means that those kinds of social work kinds of jobs have been historical. So that it is a lifestyle as it applies to a job. We are a lifestyle of social servants from slavery into social. We've never been free enough to even follow spiritual lines of conduct. So it's not anything that we are going to get out of, particularly, like I said, right now with 75% of our homes being single parents, predominantly women, and all your men are in prison. There's very few answers to very few of the questions that we'll be able to get out of this thing in any time frame that we will know about.
Mm-hmm. I saw some information from the JDI coordinator, Sally Salter. She has some racial information to depict that Black and brown youth stay in detention in the system for a myriad of reasons or many reasons. And there are few white youth because of racist diversion programs that give white youth a way out. For example, most people don't know that 80-90% of the students, kids and students who are in the DCYC or the jail for young people are Black and brown, even though they don't make those numbers in the Douglas County population. And I've asked Shelley at least 5 times for public data. I haven't got it. Sometimes people don't want to share that, even though they make it public in public meetings. And my question is, we're getting millions of dollars of federal grant. How can we as a community reverse and get data and do something to make us go forward? Or can data drive our work, in other words?
Realize, first of all, that the we doesn't include us. We don't get the money. We are the recipients of the service.
Okay.
Which is not indicative of the money that's being utilized. That gives us a false sense of reality. We don't know. We've been in this quagmire for so long. It's a way of life. We don't have time as a people to figure out what to do because we're so busy in trying to follow the rules of the present day structure in order to stay in it so that we can eat each day. It's slavery. It's not, it's financial slavery that becomes so physical that it becomes a way of life. We think that this way that we live is a way of life because we haven't seen too many other places, definitely in America, that have shown positive outcomes based upon our survival. When every time someone of hue does something well, they usually don't abide in the community.
Oh, got
They
you.
use, it's set, they work themselves out of the quagmire. So that's little here again. 75% of us still stay in that quagmire, which perpetuates this country as a handout kind of system.
Got you. That makes sense. By the way, Tommy Warren once told me that when we examine the Douglas County system or the juvenile justice system, we have to look at the whole system, not just one part of it. He's now the mayor's chief of staff. And basically, I know last year we tried to invite County Attorney Don Klein to attend a more meeting. He refused, but Tom Riley came out and participated. It turned out to be a good meeting, but there was no follow-up to address many of the issues about apartheid nature in Douglas County, and particularly helping our community call or deal with the school to prison pipeline. And we're surprised that, again, there are very few African American attorneys. So basically, the question I'm asking is, how can we help our attorneys in our communities to come around and examine the Douglas County system that has a school to prison pipeline with OPS, the jail system, the prison system in Lincoln? How can we challenge that and make that better than what it is, or so it's not like that?
You can challenge it, but we've been challenging all a while. It's not structured for us even to challenge it anymore. It's so embedded, and even our psychological development has allowed for those of us that have the same view to operate within that system, thinking that they are doing better for us doing that, as opposed to us mandating self-sufficiency. We're too far in the hole to jump up and grab the wall to climb out.
Wow.
And so there's people say you shouldn't be so pessimistic about our situation. I said, well, then bring me something that will stop me being pessimistic. Or if you can have the ability to tell me I shouldn't be that way, you should be able to identify those things that can be altered. And no one has been able to do that.
Wow. Some agents, such as Nebraska, obviously, who has nearly all white staff administrators and lack of systematic contact in North and South Omaha, are working on issues dealing with abolitionists. And I've heard them talk about abolition some of these child welfare programs because they have little or no positive results. Do you think it would be a viable answer to the whole criminal justice system, as Angela Davis says, to abolish the whole prison and jail system to be better than what we have now, particularly the billions of dollars that we spend on incarceration and the long terms that we give people? So would you support an abolitionist movement for getting rid of systems the way they exist now?
Not until you increase the mental health system for our community 199%.
Okay.
All right. We are mentally dead. We react to our melanin affecting other people from a negative concept. We don't do it from a superiority concept. So we see ourselves as inferior to the point that we don't take the kinds of opportunities and take the types of chances to mandate that the way that we are identified and structured, particularly in the communication field, that gives us a foundation of living in this quagmire. We have too many programs that have been altered directly from the Amos and Andy to a righteous consciousness and don't understand that they're the same kind of thing. They're just different time periods. We still function in an Amos and Andy entertainment concept and think that it's okay. We don't have even let's just look at the thing with the president thing now. Who's the president? Who's going to be the president? How it has to be identified, the ethnicities that have been in for a minute were unable to operate us into an even category that at a higher level we accept inferiority. And with those who are getting paid for us to be much more involved in a superiority, to keep it inferiority is pimping backwards.
Wow. Pimping backwards. Okay. I kind of understand what you're saying, because I look at some of these organizations and I wonder what are their demographics. Matter of fact, I got invited to come down and visit. It was a U-turn, right turn, upturn, and they're having some picking. I'm like, how does that deal with gang violence and reducing violence in our community? I'm not hungry, but again, I say that as show me the data, and you'd be surprised the number of organizations that have no footprint on that. And again, my question is, what is your opinion of those organizations? I guess U-turn, right turn, whatever. They deal with gang intervention, mentoring programs, whatever. What do you think of those programs? And I think there must be about 4 or 5 of those types in our city, getting thousands of dollars to help address our problems.
Because they know that in order for them to maintain their superiority, you can't increase the statue of those who are identified in inferiority, particularly when they understand that those of us who have melanin have an edge on those people who don't have melanin. Okay, that's the melanin piece is in our educational system through the pituitary gland allows for us to be excellent athletes. The pituitary gland is the gland that gives you the balance. It's if you didn't have the melanin in your pituitary gland as reptilian, then we would be savage. All right. Europeans were born without the melanin. They were created without that. That's why their history on this planet has always been in a warring, barbarian consciousness that didn't level out until America. It wouldn't have done that if they hadn't had slavery, where Europeans could dictate without being questioned about what they dictated or how they enforced their dictating. All right. So we're not in a good position because we still are ignorant of who we are and from whence we come and how far we are from where we should be.
So Elijah, using that premise then, before we go downtown and we get into education, that we need to find out who we are first, because we go outside, we don't have that. What you're saying is we sometimes as African Americans don't have the consciousness of our status and who we are. And so you're arguing, or you're saying basically we got to get the knowledge first before we go forward.
The knowledge has been presented and has been distorted over these periods of time that all of that now is we accept our position. Like I'm saying, you can't have 75% of your homes being single parent, and you can't have as many men in prison and think that you're supposed to be functioning naturally. There's an imbalance there. The traditional concept of what we learn in school, mother and father, Dick and Jane, Spot and the cat, and all that. We learn that that's what we should be like. So when we go home, there's nothing that is in that. You know, you might get more attention from the cat than you get from your mother. All right, you can't use your educational system to be a precedent for your development if you can't apply any of the steps to yourself.
I got you.
Yeah.
I got you. You know, one of the things is that when I worked with the racial ethnic coordinator and DMC and so on, we hosted a group, Georgetown. We actually went to Georgetown and we had a number of forums and we had some things dealing with Omaha settings in our community and so on. Why do many of the government workers or people who work at the state, so on, why are they afraid to come to meet with families in North and South Omaha? In other words, do they suffer from a high level of white fragility? And many of them are stuck in plexiglass offices and seem like they're scared. But how do you serve people if you never come in contact them in their communities or in their whatever, their homes or whatever? How do you do that? Or can you?
You can't, because if somebody is suffering, they don't hesitate in telling you what they're suffering from. If you already know that you're not able to change that inadequacy, then you have to lie or be ignorant to it or don't pay any attention. So therefore, over the last 40 years, 85% of the businesses in our community are nonprofit organizations. There ain't no other group. Even the Native Americans don't function like that. All right, we're the only ones that function in a surrounding where 85% of what goes on is charity. Okay, no educational piece to structure the development because they can't have a male, female, and the offspring structure. We're the only group of people in this country or on this land that function under that kind of guidelines. Africans and other continents are in much more of a control. They have less to work with, but they have much more control, and they're able to develop uniformly within that scale. Blacks in America can't do that. Either you are all or you're nothing. There is no middle class. The only ones that have middle class are the ignorant Caucasians.
Wow. You know, one of the things that I'm concerned with is with these recent COVID money that's coming to the community, a lot of that money is going into East Omaha and elsewhere, even though COVID technically impacted a lot of low-income people of color, low-income white, so on. But a lot of it's going into infrastructure. But going back to your point of, if we got rid of the nonprofits, how would we survive, or could we survive in a pure capitalist or business-oriented environment? Could we do that
No,
today in the United States as
no,
we know now?
no,
And why
no. We
not?
don't have enough. We don't have enough black-minded black developers that would invest in our development as opposed to seeing it as charity. All right, because they're not going to recognize the situation that we are in, because it would show their inadequacies over this period of time, or else they wouldn't be where they are. So they can't say, oh yeah, you're right. Because well, then if I'm right, how did you get to where you are at to tell me that I'm right? All right, and and they're not going to go for that. That's why they don't. You don't see that many black, except for maybe the director in a poverty program. The majority of all the ones that are actually doing the work are those who have financially been afforded the opportunity to work like that, but they also know that they can't work themselves out of a job.
Catch 22.
Yeah, yeah. And that's been going, like I said, that's been going on, I know of, for the last 40 years.
And
I became very much involved in the social system in the latter part of my 30s going into my 40s, and didn't take that long to see that it wasn't nothing but a hustle. There's nothing that's being developed that's going to remove you from this state. It's only going to be making you make it palatable. You
wow.
ain't gonna start right off the bat. You ain't gonna have patches on your clothes going to work. All those kinds of things, and that's only here again for a small portion of our population, and the majority of that population are women, and the majority of those women are single.
You
So
know,
no family development.
Elijah, I know you have one of the most extensive collections of meetings back in the, I want to say in the 80s and 90s in terms of attending meetings. I know you did a lot as a volunteer work, and you have a great archive. How do you think back then compared to what we have now? Have you seen any meetings or community forums like you had back in the day when you were recording all these community meetings in North Omaha, particularly? Do you see anything like that happening today? Those kind of meetings?
They don't have meetings in our community anymore. They don't, they don't have meetings. They may have a situation where somebody's going to come in, have you to come in if you are on their mailing list and see what they have been doing for the money that you've been paying them over the period of time, of which at this stage in time, their goals initially are nowhere close to even the things needed to be done to get us out of this situation. Used to be a time that they really had to fake it, but they only have to do that now. We are a disjointed people.
Wow.
All right, to the point of one of the biggest, the homosexuality in our community, particularly as it applies to our women. Let me try to hang this up. They won't even talk about it. Our women have to depend upon other women to maintain sanity, because they're the only ones that are dealing with reality. But in that same kind of vein, if you are constantly programmed by a communicating system, mostly TV, that the common thing right now to do is not only be mentally affectionate to the same sex, but you can also be socially that way to the same sex. All right, that's one of the worst things that are happening to us right now. Starting off in the prison. Anytime male prisons were allocated a portion of the building for males to be involved with each other, you in hell. You in purity hell. And that's commonplace, but they make it sound funny on television on some kind of play, not understanding that it's really like that in these prisons. All right, and so it's devilish. It's devilish.
You know what? We're getting ready to open up, but I want to ask you one question before we open it up to the audience. Many people have argued that you have this fatalistic perspective, or there's no hope. Then, if there's no hope, what do you do? I mean, there are people who think we can change in this. Pat Velasquez says, Dr. Velasquez said at one of our retreats, he says, in light of what's happening in society, we may not win some battles or issues, but we have to be part of the resistance. So if there's no hope, are you saying we just give up and stop and just lay down?
Your educational system, first of all, if you believe in God, your 10 commandments will allow for you not to function in that way anyway. But very few people understand the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments are the only ideas that were given directly to Moses by God that's documented, and everybody has to attest to that. Nobody can tell you them in their order. Okay? If you did that alone, you would have to start some kind of civil action around the 5th or the 6th commandment. First, I am the Lord thy God, there shall have no strange gods before me. Second, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Third, remember thy keep holy the Lord's day. It's all for God. Honor thy father and thy mother. Fifth, thou shalt not kill. Sixth, thou shalt not commit adultery. Seventh, thou shalt not steal. Eighth, thou shalt bear witness against thy neighbor. Ninth, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Tenth, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. Okay? If we did any of those 10, we would alter 85% of our community instantaneously. This system is predicated on devilish action. Our slavery, which built this, shows how devilish they really are. For us to try to implement positive reality into that, we have to change our history. And we definitely would have to change our presence. We would definitely have to have not a situation where 75% of our homes are ran by our women and all of our men are in jail. And we don't even question why they're there. And more than half of us are there for nonsensical kinds of things. It's purposely done. But we don't want to deal with that because we don't deal with the commandments and those things that we should not allow under God's rule to occur in our community, no less in our family.
Well, we're right up on our 30 minutes, and I'm going to throw it open to the audience, the participants, the comments, ask questions, whatever. So at this point, I'm going to stand back, or step down, as they say, and just play the role of host. So any questions, comments, put in the chat. Any questions directly, open your mic up, talk directly to Eliga Ali. And we have a number of people on here who I know probably have a comment or disagreement, agreement, whatever. Any reactions? I'm hearing crickets now. Like Postal's there. Okay, go for it.
All right, question for you, sir. You were talking about issues with incarceration. I know that's kind of an issue, obviously, in the Black community. What can we do? And what I mean by we, I'm talking about the youth, individuals under the age of 40, do to
40?
alleviate that problem.
Did you say under 40?
40, yeah.
40? You don't, when I say you, I'm not talking about you as an individual. You don't have enough of the kind of education necessary for you to give a foundation to make a decision on which way to handle this quagmire that we're in. You're more, and I'm saying this directly to you, I'm just talking about that age graduate. It's a way of life as opposed to extended slavery. You're not exposed to the realities of the wrongness, because in order for them to identify the wrongness, they got to tell you what is wrong. We deal with so much of our realities as that's the way that it is, because we don't have any political or spiritual foundation to make us not do those kinds of things, that we just go along to go along, or go along to get along. It's genocidal. There's little that's happening that will alter the genocidal negative situation that we are in as a people.
You know, Elijah, you mentioned that today I was interviewed by a reporter, and she was telling me about the OPS numbers. The graduation rates are dropping. The data that they're producing and sharing is getting worse. And apparently she's looked at it over 10 years. So we've had at least 3 or 4 superintendents who obviously have done nothing or little. And one of my questions, or at least the point that she was saying, is, can we not see the data? Can we not see the tea leaves? Can we not deviate from what's our reality showing us when you look at higher dropouts or push out or kids not going to school and all this? And she said, basically, in so many words, what she sees, it's like we got our head in a tunnel or in a hole in Omaha, and we're not accepting that. And particularly the board members, we got a pension fund that's $1 billion in the hole, and we still got the same people in charge of it and act like things going to be okay. So again, going back to the question that was asked, you're saying we're in a position, I use the word enslavement, you're basically saying we're still enslaved right now, the way you said that.
Oh, yeah. Except for we don't have physical shackles, we have mental shackles, which is the worst kind to have, because you don't know you're wrong. You doing what in order, you doing what you can as opposed to what you should.
So we don't know any better. We so backwards and negative. We think we're doing good if we really doing bad. Walking in like a hamster wheel.
We don't know what good and bad is, because you're not given an opportunity to make a decision. You're only given a parameters to operate in, and when you step out of them parameters, you are penalized.
I got you.
Okay.
Got you. Reactions, feedback.
I work in an elementary school. And I just read something on the OPS website today that talked about how 25% of middle school kids have been suspended at least once. A third more Black and brown kids are being suspended. What can we do at the elementary level to start to change the trajectory?
You can't change it because you don't have the tools to change.
What do you mean? Give me specifics. What tools do I need?
Not being personal, but what do you think is the first thing, and where should that thing happen to begin that process?
I think it should happen at the elementary level. I think you are absolutely right about the adults, and the 75% are single parents. They get caught up in the cycle of poverty. They get caught up in, I can't make any more money because I can't lose my Title 20 because then I can't pay daycare, and I get all that. I do. I worked in CPS before I worked in the schools. I get it. And I want to change it. I hate the fact that there are so many dads that are incarcerated. I hate that. And I hate that for the kids. Give me a specific tool. What do I need to learn?
There is no such animal.
What?
There is no such animal. By you being in the position that you're in, and I'll just, assume that that's probably been at least 10 years.
Yeah.
Or longer. If you don't recognize that, then that means that it does not exist.
Well, let me intervene if I can. And one of the things that I will share emphatically, there are some people who escape the system and do well. Again, who are very, one example I like to say is, I come from a family of 14 kids, 10 of us graduated from college. I've only been invited twice to talk in the public schools. And oftentimes you hear people say they're poor, they have a different language. But how do we bring families and communities into schools? If I did something wrong back in the day, my mother come up and whooped my butt in the school and dealt with me immediately. How many parents do we allow in schools to interact with teachers and administrators? Back in the day when we lived in segregation, everybody knew each other. And so you know if you did something out of line, everybody kept you in check because it was part of the village. So one of the things I would argue is I don't see a lot of the community engagement. Even the question you're raising, Ms. Matthews, how do we bring the parents and stop being like we know it all, particularly when we're dealing with people from different economic levels, cultural levels, language levels. And again, what about those folks who have been successful or who happen to do very well? Are they invited to help us with young people or with children and so on? I think there's a law that was passed that you can't kick kids out of school now, right? When they're elementary?
K through 2. You
Yeah.
cannot suspend K through 2.
So
Correct.
why do we have a law that we shouldn't be kicking kids out? Is the behavior issues that bad that we're doing that? I mean, I was surprised that the law had to be proposed by the senators to stop the school system kicking elementary kids out. Don't we know how to handle kids?
There are some huge behavior issues. We try and do family engagement. The parents, and I don't know if it's a COVID thing or what, but the parents are not interested. A lot of them, some come up, some do. The majority do not. For example, I had a 3rd grade teacher send a note home that said, you know, you should read 20 minutes with your child every night. She sent back the note saying, isn't that what schools are for? They just don't want to be involved. So what can we do to help that along?
Elijah, I see you got to respond. Elijah?
75% of our homes are single parents, predominantly female. All right, 75%. You have more men in prison today than you had slaves in 1865.
Which is horrible.
You're talking about a consciousness of normality in a situation which is insanity.
We have allowed the system.
Okay, go ahead, Cheryl.
The system has created a lot of the problems. Just like Miss Matthews, I think was her name, that made a comment about what she wanted to try, she wanted to do. But it's hard for parents, and you have to take back, if the parents came up the same way the child is coming up, how can they make a difference? How can they say, well, I want to be involved and I should be involved? Or how do they know and go and ask the right questions to say, I want this, or what should my child or can I be? Because they didn't come up through that. As like Al-Jamal just said, how he came up or how I came up. My parents were involved. My mother never missed a student meeting for kids, the whatever it is.
Teacher
conference. Thank you. She never missed that, not one time. And she worked. My father worked. So, it's looking at the system. When you have such a large percentage of, you want to say, males that are incarcerated, and now many of those, I was at a meeting where parents said, I understand part of the problem is with the behavioral of my child, but what can I do? Because if I say don't, and I even look like I want to reprimand my child says, I'll call 911 on you. If you're a mother and you have 5 other children besides that one, you risk the chances if they're called on, first thing they're going to come in to do is to take your other children. So, you're putting a lot on saying what we parents, but we need to go back the system. Why would a system have where the legislature would even have to make a law to say you cannot suspend a child from kindergarten to 6? That's ridiculous. So let's put the blame where the blame should be. It's policies and procedures in the OPS system.
It is. And I agree with you. I do agree with you. Part of it, though, is also history of our Black and brown families and the fact that some did not like school, were not successful at school, had the imbalance of power with teachers, so when they don't feel comfortable in school as a child growing up, there's that PTSD and they don't want to come up to school. They understand their kid has to go, but they're nervous about going. So we've got that involved. What we're trying, I'm at Central Park, which is at 42nd and Grand. We're trying to do PTA meetings at different times of the day. We're trying to, invite them to come up. But because of new laws and stuff, even to come up for lunch, we have to find a different place. They can't sit in the cafeteria with everybody. There's just a whole bunch of policies that we have to work around. And we've got the history of parents whose parents were not involved or who hated school or whatever.
And you have that history. Excuse me, one more quick thing is she just put it's a history, and you judge all the younger one, or all those parents are being judged by what has happened in the history. You're on one hand, you say, oh, I want to change this. But on the other hand, again, it goes back to policy, principals, teachers, and alike. Once that child gets labeled, then you're coming and you've got, well, it's apparent from that history we have.
I want to raise a point. In years back, we held a table talk with teachers, administrators, and there was people in the community and parents, so on. And what I found surprising is that they all agreed that some schools were better than other schools. And they alluded to the administrators, how they create the ambience of the environment, that they made people welcome. I used to go to parent-teacher conferences. It was torture for me because I remember sometimes the teacher would talk to certain parents for a long time and waiting. And then secondly, sometimes you go to these meetings, it's very top-heavy or dictatorial the way they talk down to you. And so I don't know a lot of people who participate in PTA meetings because basically they become support groups for the system and not necessarily dialogues on how we correct the system. And I can only say in my career, I don't remember, maybe one or two, I think it was there was a Baptiste or someone who was at Franklin, one of the very principals who came in the community and talked in a normal way with community people. I know there was another couple of principals who were very egalitarian with parents, but a lot of time parents don't want to go to school systems and interact because it's that hierarchical, you think you're better than me because you got a degree, or we don't know how to talk to low income or parents of color. So I said there are a lot of folks who don't know how to deal with those barriers, but in that meeting, they shared that up. And I wish there was more people where you had meetings out of the buildings with parents and community so they can communicate why they don't participate and how can we reverse the mentality of the parent-teacher association where it becomes parent-centered and then teachers become secondary and kids can be secondary also with the parents, and then the teachers become like the instrument of facilitators of that learning. But we have problems with communication in our community. Let me stop there. Other feedback, other reactions. We have about 15 minutes left. Any other feedback, reactions? Thank you, Ms. Matthews and Cheryl Western. Good comments. Can we change? Oh, go ahead, Nick. You go ahead.
Hey, Elijah, it's good to see you.
How are you there?
Good. I'm just curious to know what you've been working on lately, if there's any particular project you're doing, and if there's anything the people on the call can do to support your current work.
Like I said, the pandemic hit me. One of the things that the people that started with the pandemic, they said that the majority of the people that suffered from the pandemic, it was predicated on their pre-existing condition, of which the largest number of individuals that acquired that were African American males. The school systems will not change because they cannot change. They don't have any new documentation that they receive from those who put together the curriculums in the direction that we need to go as a people. The reason is because if we identify what our situation was and put it in a textbook, 85% of that would be get out from under Eurocentric rule. The masses of us at a certain age bracket would conceive that as being impossible. 75% of our houses are single parents. There are more Black men in prison today than there were slaves in 1865. You cannot make sense out of a nonsensical situation. You cannot alter where we are and where we are destined to go. We had one big thing, we called them gangs. We could not figure why are our kids fighting each other over blocks of control. It's because in order for them to survive, they had to control the blocks that they had to go through in order to get sustenance, in order for them to get a job, in order for them to do anything. It couldn't be made late. They could not be disrupted. So we had to fight amongst ourselves. Then when they altered the typical kinds of drugs that we might have to those kinds of things that would alter our chemical balance, it made us insane. So now the majority of us, even our own people, recognize our youth are being insane. I can't do nothing with my kids. They just, they messed up.
Wow.
So we're in a genocidal position. And the first thing that you got to do is stop trying to make a nonsensical situation sensical. If you stop trying to make it sensical and deal with truth and reality, you'll have to come up with some other kind of basic topics to deal with in communication on how to alter these problems.
Elijah, somebody raised, Nick, I'm gonna throw this in. Somebody just raised in the chat, they says, there are some successful schools. Why don't we just replicate those? Would that help us out? In other words, there's schools in our country, not necessarily here in Douglas County in terms of OPS, but there are successful schools. Why don't we just duplicate them? Because they turn out good graduates, they go on to do better things. And I use the word graduates, real graduates. So can we just replicate the good things and make a success by copying somebody else who's doing good?
Well, that would be a normal inclination. So there has to be a reason why we haven't inclined it in the first place. So we don't have any kind of control. We're not in control, right? 75% of our households are single parents. There's no other cultural people like that, not one. The only one that is close to that was the Native Americans. And they got smart enough to say, I'm gonna leave all of y'all alone and live on a reservation. Okay? I may suffer from other kind of things, but at least I ain't got to be bothered with your nonsense.
Elijah, the other thing I was going to share is when you look at the data in terms of non-victimless crimes, I mean, there are some people who go to jail for a long time for different reasons when they shouldn't be in jail that long. You give somebody 10 years when they should have got 5. And judges have a right, but the way they're set up, they can be arbitrary about who gets certain time. There's really no guidelines in a sense, and particularly if you happen to be a certain race, how come you got that much time if you got a good lawyer? So there are some issues there. Somebody got their hand up. I see, Norma, you got your hand up. You want to say something? Yes, go ahead.
Good evening. Yeah, I'm a product of the Omaha or OPS school system. I currently teach in New York City at a charter school with similar demographics. The school that we're at, or the schools that they create out here are called charter schools. They were part of a solution to public traditional schools who are failing as they are in OPS. What we do in our schools and some of the schools that are out here is that we do work with parents directly. So I teach science and I have 110 students and I do speak to the parents quite often. Even if they can't come up to the school, I'll text, I'll call. Their parents, they're also the mom or dad, whoever's at home, grandfather, whoever, cousin, even if they're not involved directly in the school's education, they still, if they can't help up with the homework, they're still involved in some way and they feel welcome. Right, where they're having problems at home, they go ahead and tell me, they tell the principal, they tell whoever, and they feel more comfortable talking to the people at the school. So I would say if not most, but all parents, they love their children, they want them to do well. They can't always do everything at the same time, but I do notice in a lot of these schools, at least in New York City, that are charter schools, they've been proven to be very successful, and some of them have been like top 10 public schools or charter schools, I would say. So I think that I don't want to be, for us to think this is like a negative thing. Hey, everyone's at home or there's only one parent household. Yeah, that is true. Doesn't mean we give up. I mean, having, people or kids in elementary school who aren't doing the best right now, you don't just give up on them, right? If they come to middle school and you're suspending them, that's way too early. I think there has to be stronger teachers in the classroom. I take accountability myself for my students. I look at it as these are not obviously my biological kids, but they are my students and they're my kids. And we as a community, as a whole, as all the teachers, the principals, we work with community partnerships. We all work to make sure we're serving our kids and that they feel loved. And we don't suspend them, barely ever. And I think that we're all working with different coalitions in the neighborhood, and it does help with graduation rates, whether you are, in middle school or in high school or going on to college, that we're supporting that child, even if the parent's not there at home. So I think just creating an atmosphere where they feel comfortable talking to the parents, working with the community, talking with the principal, or even giving their input with the community board, it does help the students out, and it helps out with graduation rates.
Thank you.
That still goes back to policy and procedures. Hey, that's what it's about. And that's not what we have here in Omaha. This lady who just spoke, she said it was all working together and it starts at the top.
I see is there another comment coming in?
Which policy has you not speaking to a parent directly? Like, what policy is stopping you from reaching out to an aunt or talking with that student and working with that student, or working with other community people in the neighborhood that is free, by the way? And what policy stops that? You don't have to.
Omaha public school policy stops things. Matthews, who just spoke, they have to follow certain rules and regulations. And we all know, most of us that are on this call know what the system is. And again, I have to go back. If you have a system where you are suspending children in kindergarten, that's from the top. So it is still, until you change the administrative policy at OPS, it's not going to change. And it certainly hasn't changed with the new superintendents that we've had in the past years.
I would say that if you're suspending someone in first grade, that's a teacher problem.
Right.
That's
No.
not a policy problem.
Right. And is that suspension, is that a discretionary function, or is it a requirement? Now, if it's a discretionary function, and that's an issue with the teachers, right? So if a student who's in first grade is running in the hall, and as a result of them running in the hall, you say, well, you're suspended for a week, but a white student who does the exact same thing gets what they call a 2-minute timeout. But I think that's an issue, right? And I think we should also, just differentiate between what is a discretionary issue or what is a policy issue.
We're talking about two totally separate things, I think.
So here's a quick question then. How do we know what is what? Matthew, you work in the system. We have no clue what goes in that system, because it's very rare that I've seen engaged teachers and educators in the community, or even someone like you who can speak out open. A lot of them are scared to talk like you. Are you going to get any repercussions for sharing these things that you share? I'm serious.
I don't know.
You don't know. That's part of the problem.
I don't care.
Because
I work for our kids. Honestly, that's where I'm at. And no, it is not running in the hall. It is the second grader that brought a Swiss Army knife to school in the waistband of his pants, showing everybody. It is the kindergartner that can't regulate himself and tips over all of the tables repeatedly so that everyone in the class has to be taken out of the class. So I'm not talking policy, I'm not talking teachers, but it's a different thing between policy and procedure. And I'm not going to blame anybody. I'm not going to blame the teachers. I'm not going to blame the administrators. But that goes back to, let's have our parents involved. And it is not easy. It's just, and they work, and I'm not even blaming parents. People in poverty have 2.7 jobs just to survive. 2.7. Asking them to do more. Everybody loves their kids. Everybody wants their kids to have a good education. Everybody wants their kids to be successful. 2.7 jobs does not leave a lot of time to do anything else.
Wow. We're down to about 4 minutes. We'd like to thank you, Elijah, for being here on this show. The other thing I want to say to the participants today, we're going to have a series of programs probably every week. Next week, we're going to have Hussein Lee is going to talk about OHA and some of those issues there. We're going to have a parent who used to be involved in the school system, PTA, so we're going to talk about that. One of the faculty members who teaches in Black Studies is going to come on. And so we're going to have a number of different presentations that we want to bring more education. And we're also going to probably do a couple of community forums related to trauma-informed care and so on related to people of color. So we'd like for you to join us in some of these events. And again, the other thing we're going to talk about is breast cancer. We have a high epidemic of breast cancer and cancer in our community, and we don't have prevention programs that are on a high level. And I know that part of it comes to education. And so we're going to have some experts and people come and talk about what do we need to be knowledgeable about, how we can address the growing level of cancer in our society and how we can deal with prevention. So join us each week. And as I say, we're going to try to get other programs that are relevant and have these discussions. And again, most of all, we'd like for you to continue to engage us on these tough issues and have these honest dialogues.
Same time, Oshamal?
Same time, 7 o'clock, and we're going to look at 7 o'clock each Wednesday, and then we may have some extra programs. One on Tuesday is going to do, I think, dealing with parent and teacher engagement, and particularly how parents can be involved in schools, and even a particular parent's story about how she's trying to do a lot to help the school. So most of them are going to be on Wednesdays, but check our webpage, moreomaha.org, to get a lot of this information. We're glad you joined us today for this exciting and provocative conversation, and we hope to maybe have Elijah come back again and talk more with us about these issues. As we always say, may the force be with you. Baroko.